Hello everybody, this is Connor at BoatsDon'tSink, here with another Shadowverse Evolve deck profile. This time we're going to be looking at the Fairy Forest deck in BP09. This is a deck that is not really at the top of everyone's list, I think, for the format as a whole, but even for Forestcraft, I think Puppets has just sort of a lot more popularity, a lot more people playing it, a lot more people rating it highly. But this deck has recently made top 8 at the World Championship and also got first place at the Long Beach, California BSF, both at the hands of my friend and teammate Gordon. So fantastic player, always playing some kind of deck that he's brewed up, and I think this one's quite good. It's another deck, funnily enough, another forest deck that does not play any new set 9 cards, similar to the Hunter deck we looked at already. Not that the set 9 cards aren't good, there are a couple good ones, but just not things that support the strategies that I think are quite as good in this current format. So this deck is not the list exactly that he's been playing, but it is similar. A couple card changes that sort of fit my preferences a little better, but as usual, play around with it. I'll sort of talk about what's different with his list as well, and you can make any adjustments you find necessary to fit your personal playstyle as well. So we are just playing pretty much a lot of the set 6 sort of shell of the fairy deck when Amataz released in Paragons of the Colosseum, with a couple new additions, mostly being Cynthia that we got in set 7, which was a new sort of top end for the fairy deck, Anastasia that we got in CP02, the Idolmaster Cinderella Girls set, which the original Amataz deck also did not have. It played Spinaria in that slot instead. And more recently, Orcus that we got in BP08. I think all of these cards are just sort of more incremental buffs to the deck to sort of keep pushing it forward and keep it relevant in this meta. And otherwise, you know, all the fairy cards that we've had from prior to that, set 6 and earlier, are just all very powerful shell, very good at making aggressive bursty turns thanks to Amataz, and really a good way to enable sort of the combo side of Forest as well. Looking at the Evo deck, it's just a simple 2-2-2-2-2 split, just 2 of everything. Not really anything that we would want to prioritize higher than this. That's like worth cutting down to 1 to go up to 3 on something else. So just 2 of everything. It works, it fits, it's clean. So this is 30 followers, 10 spells. Probably pretty normal for a fairy deck like this. Maybe a little high on the spell count since we're playing Ivy Spellbomb, but most of the good ways to generate the fairy tokens early are on our spells, our 1-cost spells in particular. So we do have to play those. And then in addition, we have the Ivy Spellbombs and the Nature's Guidances, which Nature's Guidance at least has always sort of been a card that saw play in this deck. Ivy Spellbomb, a bit of a new addition. Some lists I think have played it before. I am a fan of it in some decks. It can be clunky in others. So it can be clunky here, but I think it's worth playing, and we'll take a look at it as well. The curve, however, you'll notice 11 1-drops, 16 2-drops, very low, which again helps with building combo counts. Means that we always have good early turn plays, especially since all of our tokens are also 1 and 0 costs, and we can just sort of curve out early, aggressive, and start getting damage in as fast as possible, which usually leads to killing your opponent with a pretty early burst turn. The only things higher than 3 costs we have are, of course, the Anastasias and the Cynthias. So first up, we have Sukuna, Brave and Small, a staple forest combo card since set 4 when it released. It's a 1-drop 1/1. You can pay 1 to evolve it to a 2/2 with Storm. So if you do go second, you can just play this and Evo point it and hit your opponent for 2, which is actually a fairly reasonable tempo play to force them to start answering things, you know, as soon as, like, their second turn starts. But in addition to that, it has on Evolve, combo 3, it gets +1/+1. Combo 5, it gets +3/+3 instead. So it's a 3/3 at combo 3, 5/5 at combo 5. Combo is pretty easy to build in this deck, of course, since we do have the Fairy and Fairy Wisp tokens that are 1 and 0 costs that we can just run up from EX area. And since we're playing Anastasia now, we have, sort of big bursty turns where we're able to play 5 cards and recover play points multiple times in between, which allows us to easily get to the combo 5 for Sukuna, and then also buff the Sukuna to 6/6 even, or in this deck, you're not going to get higher than 6/6, but in some of the other lists, you can get potentially higher as well, using things like Nelcha or Elf Song. But here you can get the 6/6 Sukuna, which is just free storm damage, and you're probably getting extra storm damage from fairies or wisps in addition to that. So, very good card, decent tempo piece early, and also just a very good way to make our sort of big combo turns even more impactful. The rest of our 1-drops are all going to be spells, so we have 3 copies of a Fairy Circle. This is just the classic put 3 1-cost 1/1 Fairy tokens into your EX area. We're obviously going to be using this to set up all of our early game fairies. This is an ideal turn 1 play. It's probably the best, turn 1 play that we could have, just to get the 3 fairies, and then anything we do beyond that is either going to be scaling off of these fairies or buffing them. Next up, we have 2 copies of Nature's Guidance. So this is 1 cost, select a card on your field, return it to hand, and draw a card. We're not playing any of the cards that were initially designed, intended to go with Nature's Guidance, things like Harvest Festival, where you're going to get bonuses for your cards leaving the field. Instead, we're just going to be using it to recur fanfare effects. Specifically, Amataz and Blessed Fairy Dancer, which are both 2-cost followers that are going to give +1/+1 to all of our fairy tokens. So by playing them, picking them back up, and then playing them again, we can sort of loop those buffs and get our fairies as big as possible before we finally give them Storm. And in addition, it's drawing a card, so it is cantripping and just letting us sort of keep fueling our plays. It is also especially nice with Amataz, since you can engage him to give 2 of your pixie followers Storm, and then pick him back up with the Nature's Guidance, so that you can play him again on the following turn and give Storm again. And get multiple turns of that damage push. Gordon was actually not playing this card in his list. He was instead playing Divine Smithing, which is 1 cost, give 2 pixie followers on your field or in EX area +1 attack. And then if you're at combo 3, you draw a card. So it's still going to replace itself if you can get to combo 3. And it does provide extra damage. But the main thing we're using Nature's Guidance for is looping these fanfares that buff our board anyway, which represents at least the same 2 damage, I think most of the time, that Divine Smithing is going to represent, and it can draw a card more consistently, so if we do have to play this on an early turn where we're not able to get combo 3, it still keeps our hand size a little better. So personally, I prefer Nature's Guidance here, but Gordon was on the Divine Smithing. The last 1-cost spell we play is Spirit Shine. This is choose one of the following. The first option we'll look at here is option 2, where you can put 2 fairy tokens into your EX area. So slightly weaker than Fairy Circle, but the trade-off is that you get an extra mode option instead of making the fairy tokens. You can instead select a pixie token on your field or in your EX area and give it +2/+2. So this can choose, it has to be a token, so it can only choose our fairies or fairy wisps, but you can buff something on board that's about to swing into your opponent to get essentially a 1-cost 2-burn spell. It's also buffing your defense, so if the fairy was already, say, like a 3/3 or 4/4, you buff it up to a 5/5 or 6/6, it may be quite difficult for your opponent to remove. Alternatively, if you don't have one you can swing with immediately, you can just buff one that's in your EX area. Say you have an extra play point sitting around, you might as well spend it, so you can buff something in your EX area up a little bigger, so that once you do have the ability to give it Storm, it's going to be that much more damage later. Moving into our 2-drops, we have Amataz himself. This is a 2-cost 2/2. Fanfare, put a fairy token into your EX area, and then give each pixie follower in your EX area +1/+1. So that's going to be your fairies and fairy wisps, of course. It doesn't have to be tokens. Right now, there's not a good way to get pixies that aren't tokens into your EX area, but in the future, we could have that. And then, of course, he has an activated ability, which is to select up to 2 pixie followers that cost 1 or less on your field and give them Storm. So This is going to let you swing immediately with fairies. A lot of the big early to mid game goal of the deck is get fairies into your EX area, buff them up to like 2/2s, 3/3s, whatever, and then play Amataz to buff them yet again. Push up either 1/1s, either 1 cost or 0 cost 1/1s that you've buffed, so they're 2/2s, 3/3s, 4/4s. Give them Storm, hit your opponent for like 6 or 8 damage. And, you know, this is going to be sort of amplified even further by all the ways we have to buff these fairies, so the Storm, you know, scales as high as possible, as fast as possible. Like I mentioned, Nature's Guidance to bounce the Amataz and recur his effect. Spirit Shine, Blessed Fairy Dancer, both buff all of them. And Anastasia on later turns at combo 5 can buff your entire board, which of course includes all the fairy tokens that you're going to be swinging with. Next, we have 3 copies of Blessed Fairy Dancer. This is a 2-cost 2/3. Fanfare, give +1/+1 to each other pixie follower on your field and in your EX area. So this buffs everything you already have, plus the things that you're sort of saving up for the future, making it very powerful. On turn 2, obviously, you know, you're probably only going to have an EX area. But if you play turn 1 Fairy Circle, turn 2 Blessed Fairy Dancer, you now have 6 of stats in your EX area that you can pretty quickly, you know, if they're already 2/2s, by the time you play Amataz, he buffs them to 3/3s, which means you're getting 6 storm damage, and plus whatever you do to buff them on turn 3, which could be swing for 2 with Blessed Fairy Dancer, Nature's Guidance, pick it up, play it back down, buff them again, then you're swinging for 8 on turn 4. Notable thing here, of course, it is just pixie followers. It doesn't have to buff tokens, so you do get the fairies and fairy wisps, but you do also get to buff Fairy Dragon and other copies of Blessed Fairy Dancer that you already have on field. So it does make one option, you know, play Blessed Fairy Dancer on 2, and then play Blessed Fairy Dancer on 3, buff the first one to 3 attacks, swing with it for 3, and then you could like Nature's Guidance to pick one of them back up. And then you, of course, have like all the 3/3 fairies in your EX area, which means you'll swing for 8 once you get Amataz. And you just sort of keep going off of that. So the usefulness of this card, it's only here to buff, so it does scale with how many guys you have. Buffing Fairy Dragon by +1 defense can be really good, and just giving it extra attack, because Fairy Dragon can represent a large amount of damage quite early and can be very difficult to remove on like turn 2 or 3. But otherwise, Blessed Fairy Dancer is going to scale with how many EX area cards you have, so it makes the turn 1 Fairy Circle just that much more backbreaking. Our next 2-drop is Crystallia Lily. This is a 2-cost 1/3. Fanfare, look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You may reveal a Crystallian or Pixie follower from among them and add it to your hand. Put the remaining cards on the bottom of your deck in any order. Since this does have to be a follower, we don't actually have that many options. The Crystallian you can add, of course, is other copies of Crystallia Lily. And then Pixie followers, we only have Blessed Fairy Dancer and Fairy Dragon, though these are both quite good cards that you don't mind drawing off of Lily. If you miss, it's not the end of the world. Lily is primarily here for her evolve effect, and the ability to sometimes draw an extra card is kind of just icing on top. So for 2 play points, she evolves into a 2/4. That on evolve can bottom deck any enemy follower on the field, which is great removal that's unconditional and is going to dodge last words effects. So of course you're going to want to be using this on things like either Riley, where your opponent wants her in their cemetery so that they can use her pay 6 effect. By sending her to bottom of deck, you've removed her without giving your opponent that option. Followers like Romelia that have very important last words effects your opponent needs to resolve, you can just bottom deck them to skip those. Or things that are just quite big and can scale out of range of a lot of your removal. Things like Faust, things like... well, I can't think of any huge ones off the top of my head. I'm sure they're like PDK early. It's like a 1/5 that you just like, it's hard to answer with other things. Like you have Ivy Spellbomb, but being able to play a Crystallia Lily and just bottom deck something unconditionally is really good at just getting rid of big bodies more than anything. Next up we have Fairy Dragon. This is a 2-cost 0/4 ward. Fanfare, it gets +1 attack for every pixie token on your field and in your EX area. So turn 2, the best you're going to get off of this is Fairy Circle into a 3/4 on turn 2, but it's still quite ridiculous having a 3/4 ward on turn 2. And later in the game, if you've got, 5 EX area and 2 on board, suddenly you have a 7/4, and if your opponent does not answer it, it will chunk them very quickly. The other nice thing is that it has a last words to put a fairy and fairy wisp into your EX area. So if you play it and it gets big and your opponent does have an answer for it, you get 2 tokens for your troubles, which are things that you can very easily buff up over the next few turns while you get to your real big plays. Play 2 copies of Greenbrier Elf. This is a card that I believe Gordon only played 1 of. But I did cut the 3rd Orcus to go up to 2 Greenbrier Elf, just because I think this card is actually quite important to the deck's function. In general, you don't want to be taking that much time off not buffing fairies or attacking, and the cost on his fanfare is to banish a pixie from your EX area, which, you know, wastes all your buffs, wastes resources that you've spent to get a fairy into your EX area, but I do think the payoff is worth it. You get to look at the top 4 cards of your deck, reveal a Forestcraft card from one of them, add it to your hand, bottom the rest. This deck is quite reliant on finding its pieces, so getting rid of, ideally not the 0 cost, but getting rid of an extra 1 cost 1/1 that you might have sitting around that like hasn't been buffed yet, or has like only been buffed once, can be worth it in order to get your cards like Amataz or Anastasia or Cynthia, which are just your big splashy sort of finisher, important play cards that are going to win you the game. When this deck, excuse me. When this deck doesn't see those cards, it can be noticeably harder to win. And the turns, like the games that you do just sort of blow your opponent out, are the ones where you see multiples of these cards. So having Greenbrier Elf as a way to turn extra pixies into just more consistency on finding these cards, I think makes the deck a lot smoother. The last 2 cost follower we have here is Rhinoceroach from set 1. It's a 2 cost 1/1 with Rush. Fanfare, it gets plus X attack. X is equal to the number of cards you've played this turn, excluding this card. So it's basically just your combo count other than itself, which means its attack will end up being your total combo count since it starts at 1. Again, similar to Sukuna, we want to be using all of our like fairies and fairy wisps to get lots of cards played to buff this. And since it wants to be the last card you've played, it makes for quite a good card to play on an Anastasia turn with the extra 2 play points you get back. Since you can play it as your 5th card, it'll get plus 4 attack, and then plus 1 from Anastasia, and go to 6 attack, which is quite a strong 2-drop. It evolves for 0, which is quite important, and can be quite good in a lot of scenarios, really, into still a 1/1. It doesn't gain any more stats, so it is just whatever you played it as originally, but on evolve, you get to choose one of the following. You can either give it Storm, which basically makes it copies 4 and 5 of Sukuna. If you get to combo 5, it will be a 5/5, the same as her. And if you have Anastasia, it'll be, well, I'm sorry, not a 5/5, it'll be a 5/1. It still represents 5 storm damage. And then if you have Anastasia, it'll be a 6/2, which represents 6 storm damage, just like Sukuna. The difference is that the other option is to select an enemy follower on the field, deal it X damage. X is equal to this follower's attack. So you could, if you don't need to go face quite as fast, you can use Rhinoceroach as follower removal. So you can play a bunch of cards, buff it up, play it, it goes to say 5 attack, you evolve it, you get to shoot something for 5, and then swing at something else for 5. Gives you a lot of ways to just sort of clear out a room. Just like clear out your opponent's board, clear out, you know, maybe wards for some of your other things, your like fairy tokens to get through. Or, you know, just stay alive. You can use it as sort of a mid-rangey or even early game removal tool, where like turn 3 you can just like play a fairy, play it, and then pop 2 like things that Sword played that have 2 defense. Moving into our 3-drops, we have Elven Princess Mage. This is a 3-cost 3/3 that just evolves for 1. Again, a set 1 card, but very important for the deck. On evolve, you get to put 2 Fairy Wisp tokens into your EX area with a 4/4. So it's not going to do a ton on board immediately, but especially if you go like second, just turn 3 playing this, getting a 4/4, your opponent's going to have to answer it because they don't want to take a chunk of 4 damage in a like sort of aggressive deck matchup. And it gives you 2 0-cost tokens that you're able to just buff up over the next couple turns and get tons of damage in with, since they're going to just be free to play in addition to your combo count. The best turns you can have pretty much are going to rely on you having 2 Fairy Wisps. The only way you can get 2 otherwise is basically by playing like 2 fairy dragons, because you'll get 1 for each fairy dragon before an Anastasia turn. So ideally, you're evolving Elven Princess Mage on either 3 or 4, so that when you get to 5, you can play Anastasia, Fairy Wisp, or play Anastasia, get 2 play points back, play Amataz, buff your EX area, play the Wisp, and then since one of those was your 3rd card, you get 2 more play points back, and then your last 2 play points can either be Sukuna plus Evo or Rhinoceros, which can then Evo for 0. And that gives you, assuming you played the Fairy Wisps on like 4 and didn't have a chance to buff them anymore, you get like 12 storm damage off of that, which is pretty good for turn 5. 12 storm damage, and you have a full board that your opponent still has to deal with. 2 copies of Orcus Puppet Girl. Again, this was a card Gordon played 3 of. I cut the 3rd copy for the 2nd Greenbrier Elf because I value the consistency. And Orcus, while she is just an incredibly over-spec card, and that's why we play her, she doesn't actually contribute that much to the deck's strategy specifically. So she's 3 cost 2/2. She can evolve for 1 into Orcus Resolute Puppet, or evolve for 4 into Orcus Vengeful Puppet. However, you have to have at least 3 puppetry cards in your cemetery for that, and we only play 2 in the entire deck, so it's not actually possible to evolve into the Vengeful side in this deck. So we'll just be looking at the Resolute Puppet. It's a 3/3. On evolve, you summon 2 puppet tokens, which are 1/1s with Rush. Once on each of your turns, when a puppet you control leaves the field, you put a Lloyd token into your EX area. Lloyd is a 0 cost 2/4 ward. Fanfare, give your leader +2 defense. He counts as a puppet on field, though that's not going to matter in this deck. I suppose if your Orcus lives for some reason, you could, and then a Lloyd dies during your own turn, you get another Lloyd, but that's not very likely to happen. Very weird scenario there. But basically, Orcus represents, for 3 cost +1 to Evo, she represents 7/9 of total stats, which is huge for a 3/1. That's more than Floral Fencer represents. And 5 of that can immediately go into like Rush removal, which is also more than Floral Fencer represents, since she's only 4 that's able to swing immediately and your other 3 can't. This gives you 5 that can swing immediately. It can swing into multiple places, because you can swing the 3/3 and then the 2 1/1s separately. And then you get the 2/4 that you can either A, choose to play immediately, which could come up in matchups like Sword. If your opponent's pressuring you a bit harder, you might need the ward and life gain just immediately. Or you can hold it in your EX area because it is a 0 cost follower, which can be very good for building combo count on Anastasia turns. The other 3-drop we have is a spell. It's Ivy Spellbomb. 3 cost, deal 5 to an enemy follower. Combo 3, deal 3 to its leader. So this is basically just a removal spell that is for the very hard to remove things otherwise. 5 defense is a lot, and while there's not much that has 5 exactly, there are a number of things that can buff themselves to 5. So Faust, after buffing +1/+1 on Earthright, can be a 5/5, or it can make Caradwin a 5/5. Anastasia, after a turn of playing 5 cards, is a 3/5, and Old Blood King in the Vampire deck is also a 3/5. Other than that, like, you know, the Sword deck is buffing with so many different things, like, usually only buffing attack, but if they do buff, like, +1/+1 on things, or whatever else is going on, 5 will usually clear most things that you need it to, especially for 3 play points. And on some of your later turns, if you can play it as your 3rd card or later, you also get some chip damage on your opponent's face that makes your kill turns even easier. Moving into our 5-drops, we have Anastasia. This is a 5 cost 2/4. Fanfare, recover 2 play points. So she's essentially only a 3-drop, but you can't play her until turn 5. And then whenever you play a card during your turn, if it's the 3rd card you've played, you recover 2 play points. If it is the 5th card, you give each follower on your field +1/+1. So the goal with this is going to be using our tokens, our 1 and 0 costs, to build up our combo count and get those extra play points back. And then we can finish out the turn by playing things like Amataz, Sukuna, or Rhinoceros to hit the 5 cards played, buff our entire board, and then use Storm damage to turn everything sideways into our opponent. As I mentioned when we were looking at Elven Princess Mage, a big turn you can do here is on turn 5, Anastasia Anastasia Amataz, buff your EX area, Wisp, get 2 play points back, so you now have 2 play points. Play another Wisp, and then play either Sukuna or Rhinoceroach, buff the entire board, and then get 12 storm damage in. Plus however much you had already buffed the Wisps prior to playing Amataz. So that can be 12 or 14 damage just pretty easily out of nowhere. And then it also leaves you with, you know, a 3-5, a 3-3, a 6-6, and then some other like 3-3s or 4-4s. Your opponent's going to have to answer all of it. Very few decks can do that right now, so it's quite likely that something lives and you get to just kill your opponent on the following turn. The only things that are really good at clearing an entire board like that are Old Blood King can potentially do it if you have enough of vampires and other pump spells, or like Themis Decree from Haven. But otherwise it's going to be pretty difficult to answer that wide of a big board. And lastly, we have Cynthia, the Queen's Blade. This is a 6-cost 4/6. Fanfare, put a Fairy Wisp token into your EX area. Give each pixie token on your field +2 attack. So she immediately buffs your board, but she also, whenever a pixie token is put onto your field, gives it +2 attack. So essentially, whether it's already played or you play it after her, it's getting +2 attack either way. She just has to be on your field for that attack to trigger. You can't use her to store buffs in your EX area for later. Her other effect is that while she's on your field, each pixie token on your field has a Storm and a Sail. So it's just going to be your tokens, so just your Fairy and Fairy Wisps. But since they're getting +2 attack, they are quite dangerous. Say you've already buffed them to 2/2s or 3/3s, all of a sudden they're now swinging for like 4 or 5 and have Storm. Without you having to like turn an Amataz sideways. So big turns are if you're able to store up a couple Fairy Wisps, you can play Cynthia and then swing for, you know, say they're all 2/2s, or even like 2 2/2s, and then the one that she makes is a 1/1. That's still 4, 8, 11 damage, which coming out on turn like 6 or later is probably enough to kill your opponent because you've already had some good turns earlier than that. Any turn afterwards, like turn 7, turn 8, now you can start playing regular fairies alongside the Cynthia instead of needing the Wisps. And it basically, like, if you're playing Cynthia, you're probably just killing your opponent and winning the game. She does give them a Sail though, so if you are ever in a sort of pickle of a situation where you need, say you have 2 Cynthias in hand and you need to just like wait one more turn before you can kill your opponent, you can play her and use some tokens to assail into your opponent's board to be able to clear it that way. Looking at the deck as a whole, I think it's quite a strong deck. The big pros here, you have huge bursts of storm damage that start relatively early. As I said, if you go like turn 1 Fairy Circle, turn 2 Blessed Fairy Dancer, turn 3 like Nature's Guidance Blessed Fairy Dancer, or Amataz to buff everything, and then Nature's Guidance pick it back up. And then turn 4, you can play Amataz, Fairy, give them Storm, and potentially hit for like 8 damage. So even though you're not doing as much in the very, very early turns, you can start chunking for like half your opponent's life as early as turn 4 or 5, and pretty easily kill them by turn 6 or 7. It also has the ability to build wide boards easily, partially due to the density of like tokens in the Fairies and Fairy Wisps. But also because Anastasia buys you back a bunch of play points and buffs your entire board. You can go wide early-ish, like mid-game. Turn 5, I think going wide is still very powerful. There's not a whole lot that can answer it efficiently. And they're big wide boards. You can also sort of switch between the aggro and mid-range mode as you need, just depending on what you draw and what you're playing into. Since you do have some forms of removal in Crystalia Lily, Rhinoceroach, and Ivy Spellbomb, if you just need to play a little slower and build up toward like using big Anastasia or Cynthia kill turns instead of early Amataz turns. Some cons of the deck, however, it does require drawing setup cards in the correct order. If you draw ways to pump your fairies but have not made any fairies yet, they are useless. If you draw ways to buff your fairies and like swing for Storm, like Amataz or Cynthia, or Anastasia even, but don't have fairies, they are useless. If you draw, say, Fairy Dragon or Greenbrier Elf and don't have fairies, they are useless. Amataz is a lot worse if you have not pumped your fairies yet. So say you see Fairy Circle and Amataz, but not Blessed Fairy Dancer. Or like, especially like you get to the Anastasia turn and you just have like no Amataz or like buffed fairies, you just have 1/1s. Can be a bit lackluster on the amount of damage you're able to do. So you do need to draw things in the right order. Similar issue to like the Earthright decks a bit earlier, when they had, you know, fewer broken cards. Another issue is that your slow starts can get outpaced by specifically Sword and Abyss. Since we do want to spend turns like 1 through 3 sort of setting up our fairies and starting to pump them, we don't really have good ways to answer our opponent's board. So if we're playing against, say, a Sword deck and they go turn 1 Celia Evo, turn 2 Ralmia Evo, you're kind of just cooked, because you just don't have good ways to answer that early. Or even Abyss getting to stick a couple free bats early, and then on, say, turn 4, being able to go into like Last Daylight or something to just buff their board and swing for a lot of damage. Can be really hard to come back from, since you are mostly swinging at your opponent's face and trying to make your removal be your opponent crashing their followers into you. So here's the deck as a whole. As I said, no new cards from set 9. I think most of them just don't really support this strategy very well, but the strategy as a whole is still very solid in this format. As I said, it's top-aided Worlds, it won the Long Beach BSF, and will hopefully be seeing some more success in the little time we have left with set 9. Here is the Evo deck, and of course, as usual, if you'd like to check the deck log page, you can use the code in the bottom right. It's going to be 6GKL4. Or you can use the link in the description for that. Thanks for watching, as always. This is a sweet deck. I know Puppetry is sort of the popular Forest deck right now, and it did get a couple new cards of support this set. But since we covered it just last set, I wanted to talk about these other Forest decks a bit more, even if they don't have new cards. As I said, I think this is quite well positioned. So, you know, not every deck always needs new cards to stay good. Otherwise, I'll have some more videos out soon, like 1 or 2 more maybe for set 9. And then we'll start looking at the set 10 sort of tier list and meta overview and go into some set 10 decks leading into the Grand Showdown. Until then, there should be some videos on the screen you can check out, and I'll see you next time.